This in my hands is the Poco F2 Pro. It's one of the smartphones that I've been getting consistently asked about. It offers some incredible specs at a really attractive price point. But is it any good? Well, let's find out in this review here on EMKWAN Reviews. Smash that like button if you remember the hype around the original Poco phone F1. Well, this is the successor to that, the Poco F2 Pro. And to begin with, I want to start off with the design, because on the original Poco phone, that had a body that was made out of polycarbonate, whereas this has a glass and metal build. So not only does it have flagship premium style internals, it also looks and feels that way in the hand. A couple of things to really note and stand out. The first one is the weight on this. What I was surprised at when I handled this for the first time was the heft, the weight in the hand. It comes in at about 219 grams, and that feels heavy. Xiaomi have included a free see-through silicone case, and I think that will be great when it comes to having a better grip in the hand, but also preventing those unwanted fingerprints. Next, let's talk about that display, because it's got a 6.68 inch Full HD Plus display, resolution of 2400 by 1080 with a 20 by 9 aspect ratio. That display is an AMOLED panel, and it's got a 60 Hz refresh rate. Now, a lot of other flagships currently are moving towards 90 Hz or even 120 Hz. I can understand Xiaomi sticking to 60 Hz at this price point. I think if they'd pushed it to a 90 Hz display, then that would have been reflected on the price point, and then the overall package would have been kind of a little difficult to justify. So that's something to be aware of. Now, what is interesting is you have an undisrupted display. There is no notch, there's no punch hole design, and that's because the front-facing selfie camera is housed in a pop-up mechanism. And this is interesting because we saw a lot of smartphone manufacturers do this in 2019. In 2020, it's not so common to see this, so it looks like Xiaomi with the Poco phone are sticking to this. We have a volume rocker with a red power button. We also have down at the bottom a USB-C port with a dual SIM tray. You also have a mono speaker and then a microphone. Now, it's nice to see included at this price point 3.5mm headphone jack in a smartphone like this, which again is quite unusual for 2020. As far as performance is concerned, it comes under the hood with Snapdragon 865, Adreno 650, and this model is available in either a 6 or 8GB RAM variation. Now, my particular model was 6GB of RAM paired up with 128GB of storage. There is no micro SD card, so something to be aware of. But as far as performance is concerned, overall, it actually did pretty well. I mean, the Poco F2 Pro does have an internal vapor cooling system or chamber, and it helped to maintain the temperature when playing graphic intensive games. Now, I'm not a hardcore gamer, but I did test this out for extended period of times with graphic intensive games. I'm talking about PUBG, I'm talking about, Asphalt, a few others, and it did a good job throughout. I didn't really notice any significant warming up of the device. So whatever vapor cooling chamber system they're using seems to be doing a good job. Now, as well as performance for gaming, day-to-day in terms of multitasking is pretty easy, smooth to use. I don't think you're going to have any issues for the normal day-to-day multitasking. But the other thing that I want to mention is the battery on the F2 Pro. It sports a whopping 4,700 mAh battery, and it also supports fast 30-watt charging. So charging from 0 to 100 takes just around 65 minutes or so, which is pretty decent. And what is interesting is that the battery life, particularly for someone like me who uses the smartphone a lot of different activities, lasted over a day and a half very comfortably. So I think if you're a person that uses medium usage on your smartphone, this should extend the battery to almost 2 days. So as far as software is concerned, this runs Android 10 with MIUI 11 on top. Now, MIUI 11 is Xiaomi's own skin. Some people like it, some people don't. I don't particularly feel either way. There is a lot of bloatware included, so that's something to be aware of. Plus, there's kind of a lack of gestures, particularly on a larger smartphone like this. Next, let's talk about the other feature on the Poco F2 Pro, and that's the AI quad camera on the back. So it's made up of a main 64 megapixel f1.9, that's an IMX686 sensor, paired up with an ultra-wide 13 megapixel f2.4, a macro 5 megapixel f2.2, and then a depth 2 megapixel f2.4. Images, for the most part, are pretty decent and quite consistent throughout. You'll notice that the normal lighting shots look like this. There's good attention to detail. I think the color accuracy is there. It can look slightly muted in some images that I took, but for the most part, they're pretty decent. There's also some blowout on parts of images taken in normal lighting, but nothing too dramatic. As far as the differences between the ultra-wide and the main sensor, this is certainly noticeable. I think the ultra-wide does throw up more noise, a little more distortion than the main sensor. But in terms of low light, I think the low light, again, does a pretty decent job on this Poco F2 Pro. Now, as far as video is concerned, you're getting 8K at 30 frames per second. This is a bit of a weird one because 8K is great if you want 8K, but as far as stabilization is concerned, there's none of that there. Plus, it takes up a ton of storage space. So I'm not sure most people will be filming with 8K. It's a bit of a gimmick for me, but if you want to record in 4K, that's available at 60 frames per second. There's also the standard 1080p, and that does have a certain level of crop due to the stabilization. Now, most people are going to be using 1080p for video and for social media, and it doesn't take up much storage space, so I think that's a given. Now, as far as the front-facing camera, it's a selfie camera, a 20 megapixel selfie camera, and it does a pretty decent job. One of my big pet peeves, however, is the fact that it comes as default with that beauty mode. I don't need to look like a porcelain doll, so you can turn that off, but it would be nice to see that option turned off by default, Xiaomi. Now, the other thing with the front-facing camera is that it will record video 1080p at 30 frames per second. One last thing that I want to mention is that this smartphone does come 5G ready. At this price point, that's pretty good. 5G is still pretty patchy in different markets, but it does mean that there is a certain level of future-proofing for the Poco F2 Pro. Now, the last point that I want to mention is about the pricing, because the original Poco phone got a lot of publicity, hype, and love because of what it offered at that price point. Now, Xiaomi is a company that I've been reviewing on my channel for a while now, consistently seem to do this, offer great specs at a very good price point. And I think with the Poco F2 Pro, there's no departure from that original idea. So you're still getting very good specs. But what is different here from the original Poco phone is the premium specs internal has also moved over to the external. I love the fact that, Xiaomi have paid attention to giving a premium feel of a flagship smartphone throughout. So specs are great, the hardware is good as well. But let me know your thoughts. Leave your comments in the comment section down below. What are your thoughts on the Poco F2 Pro? Would you pick this up, or have you already picked this up? Plus, if you're new around here, be sure to smash that subscribe button, hit like to see more video content like this, and I'll see you again for another video really soon here on the channel. Until then, I'm EMKWAN with the Poco F2 Pro. Peace and blessings.